Hey, it's Elizabeth D'Alto, and this is the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. From body image, sex, spirituality, money and relationships, to motherhood, creativity, business, communication, and desire, Untame the Wild Soul is the place to come for real stories and powerful advice to help you reclaim and redefine womanhood in the 21st century. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 223 of the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. I am your host, Elizabeth D'Alto, and if you're listening here in real time, it is January 1st. Happy New Year. I'm so excited to kick off 2018 with a dynamic and fascinating conversation. Today's guest, Kyla Prince, is a multi-passionate creative entrepreneur whose list of skills range from burlesque performance to podcasting, copywriting, and like 7 other things we talked about during the interview that I'm not even remembering to list here right now. During the interview, we talked a lot about performance and all the things that helped her to reclaim and discover after recovering from an eating disorder. We got into navigating life as a busy person with a lot of commitments. We talked about comedic relief, problematic comedy, and the many, many ways we can do less harm. This was a really fun one. Enjoy. And the show notes will be at untameyourself.com/episode-223. As well, later this month, we are switching things up a little bit here on the podcast. Sunday sermons will still be coming on Sundays. Interviews will still be coming on Mondays. But we're actually going to change the name of the show. So I'm not ready to tell you what it is yet. We'll be making the big announcements, and someone special, a return guest, will be interviewing me to talk all about the shift on our episode coming Monday, January 22nd. So make sure you're subscribed so you can be the first to know what the new name is when it comes about. And for now, let's dive into today's show. What's up, everybody? As always, welcome to the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. I'm really pumped to have Kyla Prince with us today. When we had connected actually in a Facebook group a couple months ago, she had mentioned what she does, and I went to her website, and as soon as I saw she's like holding up a sign that says, "Every body is a good body," I was like, yes, we need to have this woman on the podcast. So Kyla, what do you love about being a woman right now?
Oh, that's a great question. Specifically because I'm struggling with that real hard. I think, man, that is such a question. What do I love about being a woman? I don't know. I'm kind of struggling with it. I'm actually exploring my masculine side while still exploring what femme is. I don't know if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. But so I'm a drag queen. I actually perform. I am technically I'm a woman, right? Like assigned female at birth. But I never really enjoyed being a woman. So being a drag queen allowed me to go find the things about femininity that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
And allowed me to exaggerate femme and play with it and, stretch it and see kind of like where the fun in it was and like take away the dangerous parts and celebrate the beautiful parts.
Yeah.
And, but recently I've started playing as a drag king where I dress as a man.
Oh.
And it has been so much damn fun. I'm just like, get me some of this male privilege. Let's go. I love it. It is, it's so much fun. But I mean, I think it's really fun to play with the duality.
Yeah.
And so what I actually really like is kind of being this genderless being who can be both, who can enjoy both and who can play with both. So I don't know if it's about enjoying being a woman necessarily, but I'm enjoying being able to play with expectations around my body, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. I love this. There's so many juicy threads to pull here. Let me ask you this first. So, in that world, so I'm sure you also know men who dress as women, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Is there across the board, and I know this is very individual, so like your opinion will not speak for all experiences, but I'm just curious, do you find, is it easier to go one way or another for people across the board, or is it 100% an individual experience?
Yeah, it really is, I think, an individual experience. I know a ton of men who are erasing their toxic masculinity by playing in femme
Yeah.
or experimenting with different ways of being masculine, but it really is different for every single person.
Yeah.
I know a lot of queens tend toward the femme side of things,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that they don't then also revel in playing with like the pieces that could be masculine that are less toxic,
Yeah.
you know,
And
or in like exaggerating the toxic, which is what I do for fun.
Yeah. Oh, I want to hear about that because we all have that toxic masculinity. Like we all have all the sides of all the things within us. It's just a matter of what we relate to, connect to, feels acceptable, express, and all those things. So say more about that. You've been playing up the toxic masculine in performance though, right?
Yeah. Only in performance. So to give you a little bit of background on me. So I had an eating disorder for most of my life, and it did express itself as anorexia at certain points, but the majority of the time that I was really disordered, it was orthorexia and exercise addiction. Okay. And it was an obsession with muscularity and clean eating and discipline and like go hard or go home and no pain, no gain. Very masculine language around food, around exercise, and around body. The idea of strictness and of sacrifice and of purity tends toward, well, there's two different ways that we see it expressed, like the more feminine, flowery, spiritual, I'm going on a juice cleanse, right? Versus the like masculine, hard, like, I'm only eating meat this week, let's go. And that was where I was. I was a very toxic person when I was at the height of my illness. And it's so funny because I actually had a conversation about this last night with several of my castmates. Were doing cabaret and we were discussing toxic masculinity and how it expresses itself. Random. But, so I was a very toxically masculine person. I was always in the gym. I was pounding protein. I was constantly like looking down on other people and judging them and sizing them up and like looking at other female bodies or female identified bodies and saying that one's not right because it's too fat. That one obviously doesn't work out. There's clearly no, care or love or anything. And it's all expressed by like how hard you can go. Mm-hmm. And it was just a very like gross place to be. So now in performance, right? Because I hate the person that I was, and I have separated myself from her in a lot of different ways, and through performance, it's allowed me to explore what built that person.
Oh, I like that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So I started performing as a man named Will Actually. Yeah. Exactly as it sounds. So I have a one-woman show, right? It's a burlesque show where I basically sing Broadway musicals and strip to Broadway musicals written by white men about how great it is to be a woman. And it's super fun. But the thing is, I needed to transition because, in order to strip out of clothes, you have to put new clothes on. And I'm like, how am I going to transition like 11 different songs? How am I going to do the transition where I change clothes and pasties and wigs? And so a friend of mine suggested, well, why don't you have like a drag king version of yourself, mansplain the scenes in between.
Oh my God. It's just my favorite thing I've heard in a really long time. Keep
going. So I created this persona, Will Actually, and all he was meant to do was just cover the transitions in my one-woman show. And what I discovered when I put on the male drag was like, first of all, looking in the mirror was a surreal experience, but it was also something where it was like, I saw a reflection of myself that I recognized, and playing in that place of like, just like this dude is just like, well, actually, and like just that, like you immediately have that like reaction in your gut, like even saying it. And then I put him on stage. I filmed him and he mansplained all the scenes, and listening to the audience's reaction to him get more and more violent and more just like, get him off the stage. Boo, we don't want him. But also it was comedic relief. It was a sense of catharsis for everyone because it was like we recognized this guy. And what my favorite part of all of that was is at the end of the show, I had men come up to me and say, I have been that guy. I don't want to be that guy. And I'm grateful that you put him on stage so I could see him. Because if I can see him for what he is, then I know how to not be him.
This is amazing and so brilliant, because one of the things I was thinking is that it doesn't feel like the person who has every body is a good body, I'm guessing isn't into shaming anybody either.
No.
And so I love, it's such a true thing though, right? Until we can see something outside of ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to locate, when am I like that? How do I do that? Oh my God. Or even recognize that we do. It's such a different way to bring self-awareness to people. So cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an invitation, and it's humor. Like, that's why I love humor, because like it isn't like this violent, horrible person. He's like a guy you kind of want to love, but he's such a douchebag. Like, why? You know?
I keep trying to like that guy.
Exactly. And so it's an invitation to be like, do you see this? You could be doing this. Maybe don't do this. You know, it's real easy to not. Here's how.
Yeah.
You know?
So amazing. So take us back. How did you unpack, or what did you have to unpack to be able to embody him yourself?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, eating disorder recovery was an experience. I was unfortunate in that I could not afford to go to like a treatment center to get help. And also because even though technically I was diagnosed with anorexia, I wasn't like an anorexic, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't about the fasting and restriction. It was about the orthorexia, the exercise addiction, the pushing myself and others around me until it was like unbearable, basically. And I spent years trying to unpack what it meant to be involved in this, right? For me, it meant first getting outside of myself, like not navel gazing, and also getting the hell off the internet. Like, I used to just read healthy living and bodybuilding blogs all day long, while watching the Food Network. Terrible idea. But so like I got a job that forced me to like ask people questions about themselves and care about their personal growth. And so that was a really good first step. And then I actually, so I became a health coach, like 2 or 3 years into my recovery. I was already like, I was eating again. I was doing the things. It was intuitive eating. I had started to reconnect with my femininity, or at least the femme sides of me that were a little bit softer and less dangerous. I was still paleo, still very dogmatic, but I started asking questions of people who I didn't necessarily agree with. And the more that I did that, the more that I found myself understanding where they came from and wanting to know more. And the more that I asked why and how and what led you to this, it was through my podcast that I had at the time, which had started out being a paleo, let's talk about nutrition podcast, and eventually became this like intersectional feminist recovery podcast.
Amazing.
Because I stopped being paleo about halfway through, because I was like, oh, I understand why intuitive eating and why, you know, some people choose to eat this way but don't need to eat this way. Or, you know, like I'd ask questions, and then I sought different viewpoints, and then I began to interview people who didn't look like me or think like me or talk like me or come from my background. And it was just like, oh, there's a whole world out there. So I'd done a lot of unpacking.
Yeah. Right.
Now, the thing about recovery from anything in general, right, is when you unpack a lot of stuff, you have now an empty suitcase, to continue this metaphor, right? And it feels real light. And the thing is, when you are staring at emptiness, it's very easy to like be like, I'm fine. Oh my God, I'm not fine. And to go and just say, I'm just going to put everything back in. It's fine, right? Because it's like, it's what feels good. You're used to that weight, you know, you're used to having those things with you. So you just go back to what you know. And this is why recovery fails for a lot of people, is because they just do the unpacking work.
Yeah.
The issue is you have to actually go and do what I call discovery instead of recovery. You have to do recovery first. You have to do that. But you also have to be like doing the discovery work, which is, what else can I fill that suitcase with, right? What else could I be packing so that I don't need to fill those holes with the stuff that I recognize that feels good to me, right?
Yeah. Genius.
So I actually started doing pole dance because I went on a date And this guy took me to a burlesque show, and it blew my mind. Just absolutely, like, people of all genders and sizes and abilities on stage owning the gaze, right? You know, as a bodybuilder, I had been primed to be like, I go on stage to be judged. I have to, you know, I have to diet, I have to fast, I have to prove myself, and then somebody will tell me if I'm good, right? I'm going to pose, but people will look at what they want to look at. So like when I had a trainer, he would tell me my shoulders were too big and I'd never be able to do a bikini competition. Like he looked at what he wanted to look at, right? But when I saw burlesque, the burlesque dancer saying, "Oh, I want you to look at my arm. I want you to look at my arm. Are you looking at my arm? You shouldn't be looking at anything else because I'm not going to take any clothes off till you're looking at me when I say, look." Right? It was just this very, I don't know, it was this very empowering experience where the gaze was reclaimed by the performer as opposed to being on stage for consumption, right? And
so good.
There's people who aren't dieting beforehand. They just go on stage in however they look with whatever they have, and it blew my goddamn mind. So I immediately was like, I have to do burlesque, but there were no lessons near me because the burlesque show was 50 miles away from me. So
where do you live?
I'm in San Jose, California, and that is about 50 miles from San Francisco.
Got it.
Yeah. So, and that's where a lot of the burlesque was happening. And so I found a pole dance studio instead. And it was a studio that focuses very much on the sexy side of things. And so it was a no male studio. It was all female only. So it was very like sensual and whatever, but it was just for you. Like you didn't have to do it for anybody else. And so that allowed me to start reconnecting with myself. It allowed me to find a form of exercise that I could do without compulsion. Often because pole dance is a very self-limiting thing. Like you can only go for so long before your arms give out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and I can only do it a couple times a week anyway. It's expensive. So it's not like I can, you know, just afford to just be there all the time.
Yeah.
So so I started pole dancing, and then I met the man who would become my fiance, and he introduced me to a bunch of burlesque dancers who got me involved in the burlesque scene. And so now I'm filling the suitcase with things like tools, right? Tools to access my sensuality, tools to access my femininity, tools to perform, tools to like find a community that allows me to, you know, seek help in different ways as opposed to like self-isolating or seeking the gym rats who are going to validate the stuff that I was doing. Right. So now I've got all these tools. Now I can start playing. Right. Now I can start exploring because not only am I recovered from the behaviors that were damaging to me, I now have a full suitcase that's going to keep me from putting those behaviors back in. There's no room. I don't have time.
I am loving this so much. And actually this happens not very often on the show. And what you just helped me to connect something that I don't think I've ever connected before, because I talk about giving people tools and practices and rituals and, you know, whatever. But what you just said, now I can play.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like the discovery, not that discovery ever ends. Like I'm sure you return to discovery at certain points.
Oh, yeah.
There are points when you get to sit there with your suitcase or your toolbox, however you want to think about it, and be like,
yeah,
ooh, what can I play with now? And the vision I'm actually having, because you're talking about burlesque, is like this trunk opening, and there's like boas and there's hats and there's all this stuff. And obviously I know that it's not just the physical things that are the tools, but thank you for that. Adding that, because as well, it's helping me to connect the difference between my experience and a lot of the experiences of the people who I help, right?
Yeah.
They're in high discovery mode and I'm over here playing because that's where I am. Such an amazing bridge between the two things that integrally need each other. Thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, that was the core of my health coaching, you know, because when I realized like, oh my God, this is what's helping me from going backward, right? It's also helping me move forward. I want to give these tools to other people. And, unfortunately, I kept moving forward with performance. And so suddenly it was like I was at the place where I was playing and I wasn't able to go backward and kind of re-access those experiences of the people who were still trying to even access discovery for the first time. So I left health coaching. But my focus now is on performance and on teaching. And, I am also doing a separate podcast on marketing psychology, which is a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. But I teach now, and I actually teach lessons in San Jose for people who don't want to go 50 miles up to San Francisco. Because I want people to be able to unpack whatever they have going on and show up and put on a boa, put on a hat, or stick in a dick made of quinoa, which is what I'm currently using, and, see what feels good.
Whatever. My quinoa cock or whatever.
It's real good. If anyone's thinking about becoming a drag king, 2 pantyhose, I layer them just in case one rips. Fill it with quinoa from Whole Foods, super cheap, right? The bulk bins, right? Tie it off. Stick it in your jockstrap. You've got a dick.
Oh my God. Amazing. That is some dick magic. So many months ago, my friend Raj was on the podcast. And when I asked him what he loved about being a man, he went, dick magic. And he described what that meant. But I just wanted to give you some context for the term. So I wanted to ask you about this as well, because you are a multi-passionate person. You're like, I was a health coach. I was into fitness. I teach about marketing psychology. I do burlesque. I teach performance. I help people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people listening who also are that way. And it's a challenge to manage. I identify that way as well. So I'm just curious, in your world, how do you navigate being pulled in so many different directions and still having to be a functional person in society that takes care of themselves? Maybe, maybe not.
Truth be told, not well. I don't have a lot of time. I actually left my job, which was a terrible idea from a financial standpoint. I don't recommend other people do this, but it got to the point where my job was keeping me from being able to live my life as a multi-passionate person, and it was causing so much anxiety. Also because, the people I worked with were anyway, not to defame anyone on a recorded medium, but
tell us their names. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It was a terrible company, but whatever. It's fine. It's publicly available on the internet, I'm sure. Anyway, but yeah, I don't navigate it well. It's something that I'm still currently trying to figure out how to do. So I've been working on this podcast on technically, it's about identity economics, marketing psychology, behavioral economics, how we invest in our identities and how that keeps us from leaving identities that are toxic, or how it keeps us invested in identities that become toxic over time for us. And specifically around women in the workplace and why we decide to become health coaches and yoga teachers and stuff. And so there's a lot of stuff going on in that podcast, but I started recording it in March and I am still not even finished with one episode because it's taking so much. I need a full-time time to do that, but I also have to make money. So I'm a freelance writer. And I teach burlesque here, and I also teach burlesque in the city, and I'm doing a show. So I'm driving up to the city, which is 50 miles each way, mostly every night. And I teach children's theater for a couple extra dollars. And I also like to clean the house and I have friends. So there's a lot that happens during a day, right? And often I'm not sure how to navigate that. I'm still trying to figure that out. I left my job in September and it is December now, just for context. So, it's been a really great process because it's forcing me to learn how I spend my time.
Girl, I can relate to that. And actually, I shouldn't call you girl if that's not what you want to be called. I'm she, her, so you're good. Okay. Well, it's funny. I just, right before I came on, I was on a friend's thread who was saying something else that needs to take a hike after 2017 is calling everyone guys. And I'm like, oh, I know. I really try to remember to call people them or they or people. Or I actually even started saying y'all a couple years ago because I'm not even from the South, but it's all encompassing. But I still, those things slip out here and there. And I like to catch myself and point. This is my way of being like, stop doing that to myself. So, and I'm on my way to losing my train of thought, but I'm getting it back. Yes. Okay. I can really relate to this because like you, I also have quit jobs and it wasn't a good choice. And I don't recommend it to other people. I'm like, if you, for as long as you can tolerate getting a steady paycheck and save up enough that you will still feel supported and like your Maslow's hierarchy needs, like your bottom two chunks of your triangle will feel secure, like do that for yourself. Because I've been the person like you who I literally couldn't. Yeah. I'm not built. I couldn't stay another day. There are places where that's happened. I've cultivated more patience now that I work for myself. Like I can do things that wouldn't be my highest preference so that I can like maintain the revenue of the business to be able to like hire someone or do this thing or try out that. But it was very, very challenging for me in my 20s when I was still working for other people to endure that. So I can really, really relate. It was like this yearning in my soul to like for no one to be able to ever tell me what to do is so strong. And I do envy people who can like just show up to work. I think it's an amazing thing to be able to do. I wish I could. I would have had far fewer challenges and struggles. But I get that. And I really respect and I really honor like the hustle is real. And even as we navigate like feminine and masculine energy and people like you should be more receptive, learn how to manifest, surrender. I believe in all those things. And I also know what it's like when it's like, and rent is due and I need to put food on the table and all these things. Yeah. So how do you, when it gets like at its most intense, what are the practices? What are the things you do to like regulate yourself so you don't lose it?
So I do have a regular yoga practice, and I know that sounds like, oh my God, another white woman with a yoga practice. Great.
I have no judgment for that. If it works, it works.
Yeah. I had to start doing yoga because I need to take time to not be rushing.
Yeah.
And I don't do like my yoga practice is not spiritual or like airy or whatever. It's entirely physical. And because I need to just be thinking about alignment. I also have I just found out this year. So part of why I had to leave my job, I have a heart condition and a joint condition. Essentially my entire central nervous system, or the autonomic nervous system doesn't work right. And so I was getting to the point where like I was having sleep attacks while I was driving and my heart was speeding up to the point where I could have passed out every time I stood up and my body was literally breaking. So just I don't know if you can see my wrists are destroyed from, just not listening to my body. So my practice is entirely physical and it is just focusing on alignment, on making sure that I'm not hurting myself. Mm-hmm. And in doing that, it just gives me like 45 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week away from hurting myself physically and emotionally as well. You know what I mean? Like it's been really helpful for me just to like stay as grounded as possible.
Yeah.
I'm also very fortunate. My partner is one of the most incredible humans. And I say that, like this isn't just like ass kissing from a partner. Like literally, I don't know how I got so lucky. Cool. So I have him to whenever I feel like things are not going well, like he listens and he understands. So just having open communication and not hiding stuff and not, trying to present my best self. Sometimes I just need to let him know that like things aren't good today and I just need you to know that. And that's really helpful to having that open communication between the two of us.
Is that something that you were always able to do or is that something that came about in your recovery and discovery?
Oh, yeah, that was not I did not have a functional relationship up until I met him, pretty much. The guy that I was dating, the one who took me to the burlesque show, was the first person who taught me that it was okay to communicate. Mm-hmm. And he was just a totally lovely human. And he moved out of town and stayed in touch, very friendly still. But the tools that he gave me, I took into the next relationship, and I was very lucky that the person with whom the person with, who I agreed to go out with on a random OkCupid date, happened to be at that point in his personal development where he was in the same place, where it was like, I've never communicated before. Let's see how this goes.
Cool.
Yeah. So we've been discovering that together, and it's really nice because, so far we've made it through a road trip, 2 weeks in Europe, we've done family holidays. We've gone to a wedding, like all the things where we could
big things.
Yeah. All the things where we could possibly have a explosive breakdown fight,
Yeah.
We talk through it. And we've also been through some really serious physical and emotional challenges where emergencies where we've had to stay calm and help one another. And that has also been really, really helpful. So even during our worst time when, the one time we didn't communicate, it got to the point where it was like, hey, this isn't working. Can we talk first?
Yeah.
It was like, can you just tell me why you're upset? And then it was like, oh, okay, well, let's work through this.
Isn't that amazing? So I was listening to Brene Brown. One of her Super Soul sessions is on the anatomy of trust. Mm-hmm. And one of the things in her, she has this acronym for trust called BRAVING. And the G stands for generosity. And she talks about be generous with your assumptions. And it reminded me back, one of the books that I've read over and over again is The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And one of the agreements, I don't remember which number it is, but is don't make assumptions.
Yeah.
And it was cool because it was kind of in between, right? It was don't just make all these negative assumptions or don't assume Brene Brown is going, make generous assumptions. So actually assume that people are wanting to do the right thing and check in with them first. Because otherwise we're just writing fiction in our brains. We're just making things up. So if you're going to make an assumption, assume well and confirm. And you might be right. Maybe it wasn't a good intention or whatever, but then just ask. And it's just so amazing what happens when we ask and people say something and you're like, I was in left freaking field. That is just not, I had no idea.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's funny, it actually kind of comes back to performance as well. When I do this, the toxic act, I think in a lot of ways, using that humor is the way of saying, I'm not making an assumption about you. I'm inviting you to laugh. And if you don't laugh, can we talk about why this isn't working for you? This performance isn't working for you. And often what happens is people, because you're using humor, also don't make assumptions that you're attacking them. They go, oh, I'm going to give this person the benefit of the doubt and see what they have to say, and maybe I might agree. Yeah. So in a way, you're kind of doing that without doing that. So it's pretty cool.
I love that so much. I've always, for the longest time, I remember the very first time I had this realization was I'm a huge fan of stand-up comedy. And I remember watching George Carlin growing up, and I was like, man, comedians have a way of making some really great points that you're like, damn, I know he was cracking a joke, but I actually never thought about that before.
Yeah.
So awesome.
Stand-up was actually really huge in my recovery. I listened to so much stand-up while I was sick, and it was the thing that kept me going. And then when I needed to replace all my health podcasts and all of the stuff I had been listening to that was making me crazy, I started listening to stand-up and to comedy, sketch groups and stuff like that. And it's really helpful.
I have this fantasy of when I get the business to a place where I could take large chunks of money and just do whatever with it, of creating a sketch comedy YouTube channel called When Keeping It Spiritual Goes Wrong.
Nice.
And I have an Evernote file. I used to live in North County, San Diego, which is also where JP Sears, the guy who does the ultra spiritual videos, he lived there for a while. It's it's ripe for so many. They're great, great people, but such funny things that are just when you get out of that bubble, you're like, this is not. People are kind of living in their own world sometimes, but so many hilarious things I think about that would just be so fun. And you can make some good points, but I think it's important. Yeah. I follow this person on Instagram called Inked Mystic, and it's basically spiritual memes.
Oh, no.
And one of them, I forget exactly what it was, but one of them, when it was someone squeezing someone's lips shut, and it was just let people think things are funny, I was like, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like, we get to also make fun of ourselves. And even as we're healing and growing, like, we can think it's funny because sometimes it is. And
Yeah.
that doesn't detract from, like, yes, it's also serious and it
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah. Comedy was hugely instrumental. Like learning how to laugh again was hard. But it goes back to learning how to play, right? Like you
Yeah.
have to be able, and obviously there's problematic comedy, like that's a whole other discussion.
Right.
But like learning how to have the freedom to just like to laugh again is like it's so huge. I remember, so I had originally considered going back to school for drama therapy. My background's in theater, and then I was like, oh, maybe I'll be a drama therapist. So I took this 2-day workshop, and the professor who had been working with us and working us through these like improv games and things, he said to me, my favorite people to work with are anorexics because when you can get them to play, that's when you know you've made a breakthrough because they're the people who are least likely to play.
Wow.
Yeah, because they're so, just so angry and serious and scared and obsessive and compulsive. And so when you can get them out of that, even for a brief moment, that's the breakthrough.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's one of those things that I'll always remember from that. I'm no longer considering drama therapy, but that was a really important point that I've taken with me.
That's super interesting. And I'm wondering for people listening who maybe have had that experience, how that lands for them. So anyone listening to this, if you want to reach out to me or Kyla and share your experience privately, obviously you don't have to like blast it publicly on the internet if you're not comfortable with that.
Totally.
I would actually love to hear from people on that. So I do though. I want to come back to problematic comedy for a second. I want to have that conversation because this is something for me as I also, in the group that you and I connected in was around intersectional feminism. And as I've really just taken a much deeper dive into that and realized the places where I was also perpetuating problematic stuff.
Yeah.
Comedy has been one of the places where I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
All of my favorite comedians are so problematic.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how you relate to that, right? So for example, and actually, so this is, if you were to watch the most recent Dave Chappelle special on Netflix, towards the end, like literally the last 4 minutes, it pans to me and I'm laughing hysterically. Like people screenshot it and said to me like, no way, I just saw you. And
that's amazing.
And people are kind. I was there with my ex. They usually crop him out when they send me the pictures. It's awesome. And, but I'm like yucking it up. I love Dave Chappelle. I've loved him for years. He came into my college in like before 2000. Yeah. But a lot of his show, he was talking about Bill Cosby. And it was interesting because he wasn't directly making a rape joke, but it was circumventing it in such a way. And I'm such a like empathic person anyway. I could feel the room. I was watching women's faces and I'm like, this actually, everything in my body knew that that was problematic, right?
Yeah.
And that's just one example of a thing. But then there's also like when a black comedian is using the N-word or talking about black people, I'm sitting there like, not the N-word, but some of the stories, I'm like, I think this is funny, but can I laugh at this? Should I not laugh at this? These have been these really interesting things. And even checking in with my black friends, people have different, I know there's no hard and fast because some people are like, yeah, I think that's offensive. Like you should not think that's funny. And some people are like, whatever, it's just a joke.
I mean, that's the thing. I think, we have to just try to do the least harm possible.
That's a great
It's really
answer.
kind of how I look at it. I have this thing. So I also, one of my other things, I started needle felting, which is just poking. You take wool and you poke it with a needle and you sculpt it and it turns into like little animals or whatever.
I've never heard of this.
It's super fun. I make sloths are the most popular ones at this point.
Way.
So people keep ordering sloths from me. So I've been needle felting a lot. I've been making these little animals for people. And so I'll turn on stand-up comedy while I'm doing it because it's a mindless thing. I don't have to watch the screen necessarily. There's not a lot of physical comics. Like I'm not like watching Dimitri Martin or anything. But so on Netflix, you just kind of cycle through. And it's been recommending a lot of white women to me. And I'll watch it. Just see what it is. And I get like halfway through every single goddamn Netflix special, there's some kind of like anti-trans, anti-fat. And I'm just like off, done. I laughed at the beginning, but you are not funny now. Done. You know what I mean? I can't, as soon as I hear who they really are,
Yeah.
because they're punching down
Yeah.
instead of talking about their experience and
Mm-hmm.
trying to expand upward, it's like at that moment when I'm just like, all right, well, I don't want to give them the completed watch. It's just, I can't do that,
This makes I appreciate that distinction as well, because what you said, they're punching down. Some of these jokes and even some of the things, as I'm reflecting back on like what Chappelle was talking about, he was not condoning or making anything okay. Like the basis
Right.
of the joke is like that obviously this is wrong and our culture is freaking ridiculous that
Yeah.
there are even like question marks around certain things. He also
Right.
talked like the whole thing about OJ. It was just
Right.
it was all over the place. But let me ask you something else about this. I have felt badly about this because obviously this is called the Untamed the Wild Soul podcast. A lot of it centers around reclaiming and redefining womanhood, which doesn't
Yeah.
leave out men or non-binary people. Like we all exist on this planet together. So I have a really hard time with female comics because to me, so many of them are so degrading to themselves. And I
Yeah.
feel like really not helping the cause. It's like more jokes, like making yourself look stupid about like dating, these dating debacles. I actually was at an event. There was a stand-up comedian and like these two dudes came out. They were hilarious. And then this woman came out and they'd really built her up. She's like an up and coming comedian. I don't even remember her name. I wouldn't say it anyway because I'm not about to say great things. But she was bombing. I've actually never seen anything like it. And then she was
Really?
addressing it in she's like, "What's up with you guys? Like that kills in like this place or whatever." But she was like, it was rough to see someone like straight up just like crickets. Her jokes were not landing for anyone. And but a lot of it was around stuff that I'm just like, I have a feeling the reason why it was bombing is because it was with like a pretty quote conscious crowd, and her stuff was kind of just like painting women as like these damsels in distress, like hoping a man will choose them and stuff like that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's just actually not funny anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's difficult because, like when a man gets up and talks about his dick and does like some like stupid trope about being a man, we all laugh. And when a woman comes up and presents like a side of womanhood we don't agree with or whatever, she bombs. I feel
Yeah.
like that's a thing that I've noticed. However, I completely agree. I have trouble with a lot of those women comics because they play to the tropes and
Yes,
they
yes.
reinforce them. And there is a crowd of people who don't want to see that anymore and who don't think it's funny because it's punching down to all of the women. It's saying like, hey, all of us, we shouldn't, all we should be doing is reading fashion magazines. Like I love, comics who do talk about, their experience being, female, however you want to call it, right? Who acknowledge when there's problematic shit as opposed to glorifying it.
Yeah.
So I listen to so I prefer to listen to like queer women comics. I've been or people who I don't know, I hate to say it, but a lot of like hetero white female comics are like, ugh, this is painful.
I'm with you. Unfortunately, I agree.
Yeah. But like, like I'll listen. So I love like Margaret Cho, Cameron Esposito, Rhea Butcher. Emily Heller. I don't know if you've ever heard her stand up is hilarious. I'm just trying to think like off the top of my head.
Is she skinny? Is she super skinny with short hair and glasses?
I don't. You know what? I listen to a lot of comedy.
Okay.
I don't watch a lot of comedy.
There was a recent stand up. I'm forgetting who it was. I got to look it up. That had been shared in one of my groups twice recently, and she was freaking hilarious. Keep going. I'll think about it.
Yeah. No. There's just so many. I'll have to like send you a list. Basically, I listen to Cameron Esposito and Rhea Butcher's podcast, Put Your Hands Together, every single week. And they feature a lot of really hilarious comics who are just, often they're just working out their sets and they're just 5 minutes long, but they're so good. And it's like people you wouldn't necessarily see on Netflix yet.
Right.
So I really like that. I listen to Two Dope Queens. Sometimes I get a little bit like, about the like super like, hey, let's drink rosé and talk about like, let's be outrageous. And it's like, okay, but they feature some incredible stand-up comics on theirs as well. So I try to seek out people who I wouldn't necessarily get on Netflix, because on Netflix, I'm mostly just getting people who I have to turn off.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Although Maria Bamford, I've been watching Lady Dynamite while I needle felt. I just started that one I'll actually stop and like watch. So good.
Oh,
she's amazing.
Yeah. Maria Bamford.
Yeah. So like she's an alternative comic. She's not for everyone. And I love it. It's so, so good. So I want to see people who are either like breaking down stereotypes, who are acknowledging stereotypes and then saying, why are we doing this? Or who are using stereotypes in the same way that I use Will Actually to look at male stereotypes as a caricature and a parody, as opposed to embracing them and saying, oh my God, you guys, I can't get a date because I'm ugly.
Yeah.
You know, like I can't do that. Yeah, I can't.
I'm with you. And some of the bigger comedians, there was one in particular, I had heard this woman, she was on the Tim Ferriss podcast, and I was shocked at how much I enjoyed her. She's actually been on twice. She was so intelligent, like had so much, she'd done a lot of healing and therapy for like all this stuff from her childhood and whatever. And I really geek out. Why I like to listen to comedy podcasts, I love to hear about people's creative processes. I love to hear people about like talking and writing and like coming up in the industry. There's so many people who by the time we see them on Netflix, we don't know that they've actually been doing this for like 10 to 15 years. And they're like, they're new to us, but they are like, they have been slogging along for like over a decade. And I was so impressed with this woman. And then she had a Netflix special, or Comedy Central, and I went to watch it, and literally, I think I lasted 6 minutes. So, and it was like you said, because just kind of, there's so much more to this person. Playing to the tropes is what you said, that I was like, yes, it feels cheap. Feels like they cheapen, like there's such a dynamic, amazing, brilliant person there. And there's a little bit of my own judgment in that, because I'm like, but you're so, like, show us all the stuff. But that's me. Like, that's my preference, you know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, you know, comedy is a subjective thing. But I think as more and more people start to look at what it is we're actually saying when we laugh at comedy that is problematic, you know, I think more and more people will seek out the people who haven't necessarily made it to Netflix yet. And that's literally why I try to listen to stuff that is like just left of center, just a little bit outside the mainstream, or like, you know, because that's what I want to see. I want to see what I'm missing. And often I find that it's a lot funnier than the stuff that I've been served. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, that's a really good point. See what you're missing, not what you've been served. So actually when I was little, the very first thing I ever wanted to do was be a stand-up comedian. I remember watching Rosie O'Donnell on Stand Up Spotlight on VH1 and being like, oh my God, this is a job. I'm like, obviously I don't do that, but my little brother is a comedian, which like brings me so much joy. But when he was first getting into it, I was living in Manhattan back in the day, and I would go to like his open mic nights, and I'd be like, you got to tell me exactly when you're going on, because I cannot, like, I will come see you, and then I got to get out of there, because some of the people, it was like so bad, and it was so painful. But it's such a like, so, and I'm bringing this up because I want to come back and I want to wrap up around the idea of performance. And I'm super curious, because I was taking some pole dancing classes for a while, and every month they do, or not every month, probably like once a quarter, they do their showcases where there's like a big performance and it's choreographed and all this stuff. I have never in my life had any interest in performing.
Interesting.
There's something about the contrived nature of it. And I don't mean contrived in a bad way. Like it's a performance. Like it's contrived, like it's planned, or it's scripted, or even improv. Like the performing aspect is just not, like, I just don't think it's the way I'm built. But you know, like anyone who's done any amount of personal development knows that when something is triggering enough for you, there's something there for me, you know? So in teaching burlesque and teaching performance, what do you notice from the people? So purely selfish question. So the people who are like super resistant to it, what's usually going on there?
You know, that's a great question. I think there's kind of like, there's three groups of people, right? Who might take a class, you know, there's the people who are 100% resistant to performing. They are there only for themselves, for the personal development, to learn a new skill, because it gives them a community, because it's fun. Yeah. Right. There's that group. There's the group of people who want so badly to be performers, but they don't have whatever that je ne sais quoi is that's going to make them the performer. And they'll perform, but you'll notice something about like the way they hold their hands, or they're not aware of their feet, or, you know, whatever it is, like you can see it in their face that they're not fully present, even though they're trying so hard,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Totally.
And then there's the group of people who are just like natural performers, and they just have it, and they just want to be there, and then they are, you know?
I love those people. They're so amazing to watch, because it's like, I mean, kind of like you said, I'm so enthralled with people who are so different than I am, you know? So keep going.
Yeah. And, you know, I think it's okay that we have those gradations.
Yeah.
You know, so I used to be a theater teacher. I taught when I was 21 years old, fresh out of college. I ran the theater department for a high school, which was the hardest year of my life.
Sure.
Yeah, it was hard. My students were 18. I was 21. I had no idea what I was doing. It was, yeah, it was great. Great. Big budget musical. Everything is fine. But I had those students, the ones who just didn't want to be there. They were like, this isn't for me, you know? And I think that's okay. I love audience members. You know what I mean? I love people who appreciate the arts from the perspective of like, I will be at your show.
Yeah.
You know, I love those people, right? There were students obviously who didn't want to be there because they would rather be watching football, and that's fine. They ended up in my class because they had to be there. But there was that group of people who were like, I love the community. I love talking about theater. I love going to the theater. I love, you know, thinking about the theater and singing along with the songs in my car, and maybe showing up at the rehearsal so I can hang out with everybody. But if you put me on the stage, I will knife you, you know? And that's okay. There's people like that at my pole studio who are like, they will spend all of their money and all of their time and show up every week and say, what are you talking about, perform?
Yeah.
Well, why? And like, to me, I'm a performer. I'm like, if I'm learning a skill, I'm putting that damn thing on stage.
Right. That's so funny that people are like, well, then why are you doing it? And I'm like, why not?
Yeah. And so, you know, so like, I'm like, why are you spending this much time? And for them, it's about the community. It's about learning. It's about just growth and experience and friendship and all of that. And that's great. I love it because they're going to show up to my show. You know what I mean?
I'm going to clap so loud and cheer for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in the front row. Go, Kyla!
And we get to have a conversation, and we have something that we can relate about, but we're not in competition with one another. Yeah. And that's so cool. I love it. I love audience members. They're the best. One of the reasons why I love my fiance is because he's not a performer. He loves the theater. Like, on our second date, we went to the theater, and he was like singing along in the back.
No way.
Like, he had season tickets to the Palo Alto Players. You know, when we moved in together, we got season tickets to the SHN Theater in San Francisco. Like, we support local theater. We will go see some of the like super, super rough community performances, and we'll pay extra to go see some of the like super high quality. We just want to support.
Yeah.
And I love him for that. I cannot, he's very talented. He's got the moves. I'm like, you should do boylesque, you know, which is the male version of burlesque.
Amazing.
And he's like, absolutely not, but I'll be at your show.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
I'm with you. Cool. So I have a camp. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really what it is. Because I'm not triggered by that other people want to perform. I'm like, great.
Yeah, exactly. And I love it. And I love the people who want to perform and aren't professionals or whatever it is that don't have the thing, you know. Cool, great. I love people who show up and keep trying, because honestly, those were my best students. You know, the students who didn't have to work for it, who just like got a lead, like they were incredible. They deserved it. They had talent. They obviously did work, like they took voice lessons and dance lessons and whatever, but it wasn't like they had to like claw their way. Like, they knew they were getting the lead. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I love those students. But it was there was like my group of students who didn't have it, but they worked their asses off. Yeah. And to be honest, those are the ones who are performing today.
That's
you know what I mean? Because they got it. Mm-hmm. They went for it, and they were hungry for it. And so they were the ones who showed up, who stayed late, who volunteered even when they didn't get in, who were a part of it. And now they get work, you know? And like, that to me is just so fucking cool, because sure, maybe they're not going to be on Broadway or whatever, but they might. you know?
You never
and like,
know.
Wouldn't it be fucking cool if they did?
That's amazing. Yeah, I was actually this morning, I started watching The Voice last year. I had never watched it before, even though I had been hearing how great it is for years, because Alicia Keys was a judge and I love Alicia Keys. And then I've been watching it since, even in the seasons where she's not there. And today I was actually clicking around on Instagram and following the people who have been on the past couple seasons I've been watching. And it's been cool to like go back and see that they're grinding. They're doing it. And occasionally someone's like singing with Blake Shelton and Gwen Stefani, you know, or, you know, they're with so-and-so in this place and they're doing it. I think there's something so amazing about that quality of character.
Yeah.
When, like you're saying, someone like they have enough of it to even make it to a place like The Voice. And then it's like, and they're going to keep going. Like, you didn't win. Like, these things that would make or break others is just like another thing. I loved what you said about the person who didn't make it, but they'll volunteer to support. I feel like that takes so much passion and character.
Yeah.
So cool.
And it takes a little bit of a lack of ego and a belief in yourself, if that makes any sense at the same time.
100%.
Because it's the people who are like, yeah, sure, I'll be the stage kitten, even if I didn't get into the show, right? The stage kitten, by the way, is the stripper picker-upper at a burlesque show. So they're the ones who come out on stage and set up the props and take away the clothes.
Cool.
And, you know, but like the people who say, you know what, I didn't get in, but I'll totally be there to work backstage. And, you know, maybe someday I'll get in. Those are the people that you want to work with later, you know?
So like, I love that. I'm not that person. I'm like, F this. You didn't want me. I don't want you. I don't know if that's true. I probably used to be that person, but I guess the context of my life is just different now. Yeah. Oh man, this was I knew this was going to be so, like when I saw your face on your website, I'm like, this is going to be a blast. I love this is what's cool about multi-passionate people, right? It's like, what'd you talk about on the podcast? 17 different things.
All the things.
So
why not?
It's so fascinating. And I appreciate your life experiences. I appreciate your honesty about, you know, where you're still struggling and where you're still figuring stuff out. It's, again, obviously, I think I've mentioned her 3 times already. I love Brene Brown. And one of the big things that I'm so into lately from her most recent book is when she talks about speaking truth to bullshit.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she talks about is like how infrequently people are willing to be like, oh, I actually don't know. Or I'm not good at that. Or I haven't figured that out yet. People will kind of just like give you an answer to save themselves. And I just love, there were a handful of times in this conversation where you could have done that and you didn't. And I think that's so amazing. And just also thank you for modeling that for our audience and for our listeners. So great. Yeah. So is there anything, your website, KailaPrins.com, KailaPrins. It's Prince, not Prince. I keep doing that. And
this is so that's my writing portfolio for anyone who's interested in freelance stuff. So I have several different websites, unfortunately. So
no one is surprised after this conversation. Tell us them all.
Okay. So number one, if you're interested in hiring me to freelance write for you, KailaPrins.com. If you're interested in learning about the burlesque performances and stuff like that, if you want to take a class with me, I'm also working on an online course. That's SiliconValleyBurlesque.com.
That feels like an oxymoron. I love it.
Yeah. So Silicon Valley Burlesque. And then my personal website is performingwoman.com.
Yeah.
So that's where you'll find out about like where my performances are and what Performing Woman is and all of that. And then the last website is my new podcast, and that's bodybrandpod.com. The podcast is going to be called Your Body, Your Brand.
I love that. And I'm really interested in checking that out. So thank you for all of the things. Yeah. And for everyone, this is episode number 223. So don't worry about having to remember everything she just said. You could just go over to untameyourself.com/episode-223. We'll put all the links so you can find Kaila. I need to make it up to Northern California now. I want to know when your show. I want to be in your audience.
Yes, we did it.
We did it. So fun. So thank you so much. Great. This was awesome.
Thank you. This is great.
Bye.
Bye.
And I started to notice really quickly this pattern among my clients, and they happen to pretty much almost all be women. And I would like sit with them, and every single one was so inspiring, had great ideas for her company or her industry, very conscientious, like good-hearted people, hardworking, like very diligent. And at the same time, they were all saying, but I'm not ready yet to do that thing I want to do. Maybe I should get a PhD in it before I do anything in that direction. Maybe I need 5 more years experience. if that was a good idea, wouldn't someone else have already been doing it? So I was hearing all of that. I also happened to know some of the people that were running the organizations they worked at, because all these people were from my network. And it was basically like, these unprepared buffoons get to run the thing, and you're sitting here telling me your amazing ideas and working so hard and you're invisible. Like, what? And then I would look in our newspaper and feel the same way. Like, why did that person, get to hold elected office? And why is that person running the school board? And, the conversation I just had with my friends about what's going on in that school system is way more sophisticated and on point than what, like, the power was clearly in the wrong place. And that I just, it was a bigger, that's the broad issue, right, in our world of who holds power and who holds wisdom and where that are, right? So I started to get really interested in that. And of course, the only reason we get interested in something in particular, I think, is when, it touches something in us. And so it also touched for me, like, what the hell happened to me? I had a great education. I had a great graduate degree. I have supportive parents. Why don't I feel confident? Why am I not doing the thing I want to do? Like, how did this happen?